Erin, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me about your research and your career as a communication scholar. One of the things that made me really interested in wanting to include you in this book is that your work focuses, I think, in a way that is unique for communication scholars on the individual, as the individual sort of has a place within a more public domain in society. And so our students at this point are reading the chapter on self and identity. And that chapter in itself represents kind of a transition point within our thinking about interpersonal communication, which historically has been so focused on the self and the self-concept. But you were one of the scholars at the forefront of getting us to think not so much about self, but as identity, right, and the ways in which we communicate ourselves to others. So tell me a little bit about what drew you to a career studying this really important topic.
I was thinking about that, and so when I was a student in grad school at the University of Wisconsin, I had a friend who I liked, but he also drove me crazy. And I think I've always been an analyzer. What is someone doing, or what are the little things that are making me think, feel, draw these conclusions about a person, or how am I presenting myself, and what is it that does that? And so my my analyzing of this fellow led me to kind of looking at conversational interaction. And so I've been interested in identity as it links to talk, that is, and talk broadly, both what we say, how we say it, what we leave out, what we emphasize, all the choices, and that it's all of those little things that are part of being a particular person on a particular occasion, and I tend to think of identity in the plural. I mean, and that is, we have multiple identities, and the particular situation in which we're talking or being brings some of them to the front, and what's fascinated me in research is that in some situations the identities we're committed to have some tensions between them, and figuring out how to navigate that is basically one of the ongoing communicative challenges, and it's what makes studying communication so fun and rewarding.
Well, isn't it such an essential part of communication that pervades everything we do? Whenever, as you say, what we choose to say, what we choose not to say, how we choose to say it, is all a way in which we construct this narrative of who we are. And I like your point about how we're managing multiple identities within any given moment. And I think about conversations I have. As you know, I'm married to another communication scholar in my department. And so there are times when I'm talking to him as his associate dean, I'm talking to him as the mother of his children, and I'm talking to him as a colleague in a communication department. And we might have those conversations in 15-minute spans. So the fluidity with which we are negotiating those and shifting those identities collaboratively.
Right. I mean, it just brought to mind being in the same situation of husband, wife, and colleague. That kind of, though times be my husband, don't be my colleague. I mean, the kind of that, because we are colleagues and invested in some of the same work activities. A lot of times we see things similarly, but sometimes we don't, and that becomes a place for, how do we? I mean, it's one of the challenges of working in the same place with your partner, because I have opinions about the issues that he's doing. I can't just be a supportive spouse.
Right. And our students will find themselves in those situations because they will be in work situations where they will have coworkers who are their friends, who are their supervisors, who are their subordinates, and how they're going to construct and present themselves in those contexts becomes part of the challenge of navigating successfully a workplace situation.
Right. And even, I mean, I think a central identity to being a teacher, or identities, and I think of this, is how can I be supportive and help people do good work, and how can I be critical, what needs to be said, and that sometimes those work well together, but sometimes it feels like, I'm not quite sure how to do it, that either I don't say something and that's a problem, or I say it and it really hurts the person.
How important then do you think being able to create and experience valued identities, how important is that to maintaining relationships and satisfying work situations and family relationships?
I think it's key. I mean, it's central. And as I said, the things that I find myself puzzling about is how do you do it when there's valued identities that are partly in tension. And I was thinking of a student I worked with who did her dissertation looking at hospice care workers. And hospice is all about providing an alternative experience for dying. And they see themselves as very different in the medical system. But what Julie found as she began to go in with the volunteers and attend the meetings was that they also are very much part of the medical system, and a taken for granted piece is I'm a nurse or I'm a physician. Particularly nurses were central, and being a healthcare practitioner is I make judgments and I can sort out things about people's physical health and what they're telling me, and that hospice and support is about being supportive, and that those two, figuring out how to navigate that supportive is taking what the patient says seriously, and it's their reality.
But being a nurse is to take your expertise seriously and to impose a reality. Yeah,
and so the kind of funny little situations they got into as they talked about patients where they all of a sudden realized they were sort of tipping over, usually in being too critical and exercising judgment, but occasionally the other direction. And so that's what are the ways people come up with creative ways to kind of honor, if you will, both identities, that they're caring and supportive in a medical professional or whatever it is, and they're always, depending on the situation, they're a little different.
And it's really communication and that collaboration and communication that makes that happen.
Yeah.
So as you think about the kind of insights we've discovered as communication researchers about self and identity and interpersonal communication, either looking back or the kinds of questions you think are most pressing moving forward, or the things you're working on right now, what are some important issues that we have learned about or will learn about?
So this ties to a little bit what I was saying a moment ago, but I'm fascinated by those places of dilemma or tension. And so that, that just raises all kinds of interesting issues. I've been studying most recently disputes about who can marry, both in legislative hearings and in appellate courts. But in the public hearings where ordinary people go out and say what they think, religion has been front and center stage. People's commitments to religion or commitments to equality and civil rights. And so, anyway, so it's how do we put things together in social life when we have identities that are rooted in things that are often at odds with other people's commitments. And so that surfaces in all kinds of activities, places, relationships.
What you're highlighting for me is a reminder that some of the time, when we find ourselves feeling really strongly about an issue, and an issue that we feel about, we intersect or relate to as an ideology, or even if we don't label it that, just something we have a very strong, passionate position on, that maybe that's a time to look and to see, how is this position important to a valued identity? How is this coming from? And if I can identify that identity as the root of that passion, can that help me navigate a difference with somebody? Can I understand that, I can still hold this identity and maybe be cooperative or compromising on the position? That maybe it just gives us a little bit of strategy for dealing with what are sometimes real ideological divides.
Yeah, well, I think always having a sense of what's motivating you or what makes something such a passionate issue can help you sort through, if you will, the good and the bad pieces of that what you need to honor in yourself and what you need to say, this is not something that, I want to push through this.
Mm-hmm. Now, my work has been in the past on areas of conflict, and one of the features of conflict I always like to highlight are the identity goals we have in a conflict situation, because I think those are what people have trouble compromising.
Yeah.
I might be able to give up, you know, who gets the last piece of pie, but I can't give up my self-respect or the feeling
Right.
like you're not being fair or that I need to count. And so I think when people are able to see issues as being identity-based, it helps them understand how they can communicate to achieve those identity goals a little more effectively.
Right. And I think I would add another piece to that I think something like respect is sort of the essential currency,
Mm-hmm.
and that what I'm particularly interested in understanding is what counts as respect in this situation, and what are people reacting to, again, going back to in the talk, that they're seeing as indicative of being respected or not. And
Mm-hmm.
that's often, I think, I very much agree, that's a central a way of being valued and treated and appreciated, that we all want that, and we don't always extend it to others.
So let me ask you kind of an out-of-the-blue question, but all of this, as we talk about how important identity is to issues of conflict and tension and interpersonal communication, do you have any insights on where that identity comes from? We talk about people being choiceful about what they will and will not express in a moment, but everything we do, from our clothing to our gesturing to our nonverbal style to our way of speaking, are ways in which we are creating that identity. And sometimes I wonder if it's helpful for students to stop and think, when I don't recall making those choices consciously.
Right, no, I don't think we, I think it's biology, I think it's family, culture, and some of it's chosen, but we're choosing within things that are beyond our choice making, that have sort of, the society and our immediate relationships have shaped the context. And maybe once we've made some choices, we can then choose some other things that weren't part of it.
That support it.
That we start to see as choices. I mean, sometimes the big insight in life is coming to see something as a choice, that it's not just you do this because you do this, and this is what one does in this situation.
And that maybe if I don't like the identity I have, or I want to have a more professional identity or a more laid-back identity, that there are things I can do to construct that might help me become more the person that I want to be.
Right, and that reminds me, when in my earlier days, I was a speech therapist, and right after I finished my master's degree, I took a job in a hospital, and I was moving someplace I'd never been. And I had seen myself as kind of, quiet or shy and wanting to be more outgoing, and so I made this commitment to myself that I was going to, very concretely, I was going to initiate, ask people to go to lunch, ask them to do things. I mean, I would often have been the person who waited to be asked to do things. And I see that as a real identity transforming moment, because nobody knew that I saw myself as shy, and that people treated me as just this moderately outgoing kind of person. And all of a sudden it was, okay, I'm not a shy person anymore. I did it after, a year or so, that kind of... That's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard, and it was helped in this case because nobody was in my environment that knew me and that I was this kind of person, and so it was a little bit easier to kind of try and it wasn't exactly a radical shift, but it was a
But
notch.
it is a takeaway message that through
Yeah.
communication, people can craft the identity that help to change or modify the identity that they have.
Yeah,
That's a powerful message. So Karen, one last general topic to cover with you, and that's what kinds of insights you could share with our students about what they might do to use what they're learning about in this course in their future careers.
Well, I teach a course, Communication in the Justice System, and it's a senior seminar, and it's actually my favorite course to teach because I bring in visitors. We go to the courts and the jail and the emergency center, and so one of the things, I mean, I think one of the things that attracts communication students to the course is some broad interest in policing or justice or the law. And so I almost always have a handful of students who are thinking of some justice-related career, either social services, victims assistance, or law school. A couple students, and occasionally there was one who went on to become an FBI agent, but that's rarer in the years I've been teaching it. Restorative justice. Someone is just now moving into a position in a restorative justice. So that's really if a student has those, well, broadly justice, law, social service kinds of interests, they're going to need to do particular kinds of things. But last semester I was able to get our district attorney to come to class in Boulder County, and he had done his undergraduate degree at CU, and he was saying, be a communication major. That kind of being a good attorney is working with people, understanding how to talk and strategize. I mean, he was talking about all the ways things have been changing in the court, as well as technology and stuff. And I thought, oh, that's wonderful that
well,
he's
yeah,
being
if you think about the way in which a courtroom operates, being able to communicate persuasively and to be articulate and to be sensitive to how jurors or the judge are hearing things, being a good listener,
right.
Everything about putting together a strong case in a legal system really rests on the things we're learning about within communication. But I like the other kinds of jobs that you mentioned that are not central to being a lawyer per se, but working with victims and
right.
working within the judicial support system as well.
Right,
so
right.
That's really interesting. I know we end up with a lot of students who go on with a general interest in a career in law, so you're really highlighting how communication can be a gateway to success within those careers.